Hi guys. Oh, hi Pandita. Sorry. Hi guys. It's April 20th, 2020. I think it's a Monday. It's over a month since we entered our homes, and little did we know we'd never leave again. But today is special because today Pandita and I decided to make you a little video. We're moving in terms of class from biology and evolution to archaeology and culture. And that can be a super wild leap. So I want to explain the transition and outline some of the big ideas and concepts for you to keep in mind. Guys, this is my first video. So I always thought archaeology was like the study of the past, so it was boring because it was done. But archaeology isn't just about the past. It's about things and the way we think about things. And that, I think, is really fascinating. So now the reading becomes less about old bones and more about old other stuff. Artifacts, assemblages. Let me say it again. Assemblages, right? Because I really like that word. You say it like it's French. Assemblage. Artifacts are things that archaeologists find. An assemblage is a collection of artifacts, right? Because context matters. And finding a stone tool by itself means one thing. Finding it with a collection of stone tools is a whole other ballgame. But stuff tells stories. Old stuff tells stories, but the stuff we have tells stories too. And thinking about the stories that stuff tells is actually way more awesome than you thought. In fact, it's so dope that I made you a video of me talking because y'all are not necessarily enthralled by the reading. And I care about your lives and your souls and you knowing how cool this actually is. So anthropology is the study of what makes humans unique. And anthropologists study this thinking about the key characteristics of the perspective, right? So we talked about that when we were still seeing each other in person. Those are holism, relativism, comparison, a biocultural approach, evolutionary or adaptationist thinking, we sometimes call it plasticity, and a focus on empiricism and empirical data, meaning data or evidence that can be observed with the five senses. So, what makes humans unique? Well, we're probably the only living organism capable of altering the world to such an extent that we're now basically living in the end times and preparing for the apocalypse. So we're going to talk about that now. You're going to love it. It's going to be great. So we're moving from the Paleolithic era to the Neolithic era. And Paleolithic means Old Stone Age. And Neolithic means New Stone Age. These are types of relative dating systems, meaning they're not absolute dates, which would be a number, right? Years. Instead, these are periods that are defined relative to the types of tools also found, right, in the archaeological record. So during the Paleolithic era, people lived in smaller bands and tribes. They were mostly related by blood or kin, and they were nomadic, which means they moved around. They were mainly hunter-gatherers or foragers, which means they did less to alter their physical environment than when people started farming. They lived in egalitarian groups, which means no one had more power, status, or stuff than anyone else. And get this, no one was in charge, right? So that's really hard for me to wrap my brain around. That means no one had more power than anyone else. So sure, people might lead different activities and tasks, but because they had knowledge, because they were skilled, or they were respected. The opposite of an egalitarian group is a socially stratified group. And that's where we see distinct differences in wealth and power within a society. And people are organized into socioeconomic classes that are hard to move out of, regardless of what we'd like to believe. We live in a socially stratified society, right? Most modern day industrialized nations are socially stratified. So the Neolithic era begins with the Neolithic Revolution, which is when 7 areas of the world all started farming independently. Farming means they were relying on domesticated animals and cultivating plants for over 70% of their diet. This happened in different ways as groups responded to similar environmental changes at the end of the last ice age. But it happened in 7 different areas of the world. Some groups moved totally into farming and agriculture, some didn't. But it was a new type of living, and thinking holistically, it impacted all aspects of the social, the material, and the cultural world that we live in. Personally, I think it's pretty interesting that the way we live and use the environment introduced new ideas about our place in the world, ideas that had to then be shared to a certain extent, but were also contested and debated. The Neolithic era brings war and violence, right, in a way that we've never seen. It brings ideas about nationalism, religion, human rights, identity, freedom, and all sorts of other things that we still care about and that play a big, if sometimes invisible or sort of like assumed natural role in how we make decisions and understand our lives, our experiences, and our worlds. So this is something to pay attention to in the videos for this week, right? Is the way we see connections between how we interact with our environment in order to serve a biological need and how we think about ourselves and the world around us, right? Ideologies, paradigms. So at this point in time, we also see the beginnings of culture, in part because we see more stuff, right? We just know more because people left more behind. Once people began to settle and farm, they made things. They left evidence of their interactions with the world around them. And things can tell us a lot about the world in which people lived. So for example, like look at your shoes, right? We all have shoes. But what might that say about our world? Do we all have the same shoes? You know what? I don't have my shoes on. Okay. I had a disaster. I spilled stuff. But whatever. We're back. So, look at your shoes, right? We all have them. So what might that say about our worlds? Well, do we all have the same shoes? How are they different? Why are they different? You want to see my shoes? Oh, Pandita likes my shoes. Let's look at these shoes. These are some nice shoes. Pandita, are you a sneakerhead? Here are shoes for another activity. Does this mean we're going on a walkie-walkie? Well, and look, and we have shoes for being fancy. I have other shoes too, right? But the point is, right? Maybe we engage in different types of activities, so we need different shoes. Hunter-gatherers didn't have different activities, right? They all basically engaged in the same type of activity, food collection. Maybe we have different shoes because they're trends in regards to region, age, gender, or other things. That tells us about the important identity groups our society uses to organize us. Well, you can comment on my shoes in your response journals. Maybe we notice that some of us have more shoes than other people, right? So what might that say about the way our lives are constructed and ordered? Where do people's shoes come from? What materials are they made of? That tells us about the relationships of trade and how we interact with other parts of the world and the scope of the economy. Stuff tells us things about the world, right? And that's what archaeologists do. And this all goes back to how people make a living or get what they need to meet their biological needs in a given environment. They can do it the same way in different areas or different ways in the same area. But we have to pay attention to more than just human biology, right? Now, at this point in the class, we need to pay attention to the way that human biology interacts with the natural environment, with sociocultural values and structure, with populations, and with external factors like other groups of people. So we know that when the Ice Age has ended, right, about 12,000 years ago, or BP, before present, people began to interfere with the reproductive processes of plants and animals. That's called domestication. As you watch the videos for this week, pay attention to the evidence that archaeologists use and how they interpret that evidence to draw theories about those interactions, right, and about people's lifestyles. So, an ecological niche is the way a group interacts with others in its environment, in its regular, habitual way. It's what's used and how it impacts that environment. An evolutionary niche is the way an organism or a population responds to and interacts with all the natural selection pressures that exist in its environment and evolves genetically in relation to those pressures. So let's talk about dogs. Guess what the first domesticated animal was? Pandita. 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 What was the first domesticated animal? Look in the book. Look in your anthropology book. What was it? It was a dog. Oh, good girl. See? First domesticated animal, dog. Sure, dogs and wolves are related, right? But they've exploited different ecological niches and different evolutionary niches since about 18,000 BP. A recent study on dog intelligence that was done at Harvard finds that dogs also have evolved a particular ability to pick up on human gestures, right? It's an ability that other species lack, even species that seem more closely related genetically to us. When the researchers at Harvard tried to teach chimpanzees that the way to find a hidden snack was to notice which of two bowls the human experimenter looked at or pointed to or tapped on, the chimps were like, whatever. What? They were mystified. Dogs aced the test. Oh guys, she's reading her book. She's reading her anthropology textbook. Y'all should be doing a little bit more. Even puppies that had minimal contact with people did well on this test. Wolves, however, didn't. So this isn't just learned conditioning. This is innate behavior. These are traits encoded in DNA, traits which have been selected by the environment and with significant pressure from human beings, right, Homo sapiens, us, as part of that environmental context to shape the way a specific species, dogs, develop and the traits that they exhibit. Now, biologists routinely speak of animals exploiting their ecological niche. Well, it turns out that we're the ecological niche for dogs, and they exploit us. While lions are, busy scanning their field of prey to hunt and do their lion thing, dogs are watching our hands to see where the food is stashed. They rely on us, right? We are their natural environment. That's domestication. But these recent findings also say something revealing about why we think dogs are so smart in the first place. Studies of animal intelligence and human prejudices about animal intelligence have long suggested that we take a remarkably self-centered view of that matter, right? So we don't think relativistically about other life forms and other species on the planet. People tend to think animals are smart if they respond to things the same way humans do. And that's an example of ethnocentrism, right? So dogs exploited an evolutionary niche, and that niche had to do with manipulating human needs and emotions to become, like this bougie princess right here. Do you see we match? Can you see that? We match. I did it for you guys to bring light into your lives and a little laughter into your days. Also, I did it for me because, y'all, we've been home for a long time. Okay. Now, when nature does this, when nature selects traits that enable an organism to be more likely to reproduce and pass along its genetic material to its offspring, that's natural selection. But when people do it, it's called artificial selection, right? So when we start selecting the traits that are best suited for our needs and interfering with reproduction in order to produce organisms that are more likely to have those traits, it's not natural selection anymore, it's artificial selection. And artificial selection, it's not just like genetically modified organisms or GMOs or, whatever YouTube video you saw about like the square watermelon or whatever that was made across the world. It's, been going on since around 12 to 10,000 BP. Mind blown. So this role in not just adapting to, but creating our environment is super important. What makes Homo sapiens unique, that's us. She's not a Homo sapien. I'm a Homo sapien. You're a Homo sapien. Literally everyone alive on the planet today that is a person is a Homo sapien. So what makes Homo sapiens unique is their ability to engage in niche construction. What that means is that when we face environmental pressures like extreme cold, for example, we don't grow massive amounts of fur. We use cultural adaptation to modify the environment. We make clothes and create heating systems, build houses, all that stuff. This is all technology, and technology is part of our integrated cultural system, right? So when we use technology to adapt our environment to our needs, it's a form of cultural adaptation, not biological adaptation. I often wonder, right? And I bet you wonder too, maybe, why we have like so many related ancestors. So we learned all about the different members of the genus Homo, right? But we're the only members of our genus that have not gone extinct. And a lot of anthropologists would argue that that's the result of niche construction. Right? Other species might have been better biologically adapted to specific environments, right? Like Homo neanderthalensis, super biologically adapted for extreme cold weather. But when it began to warm up, that became a problem. Homo sapiens used culture to adapt their environment. And that's a way faster process than genetic evolution through natural selection. So like in the past 200,000 years, we've seen not a lot of biological changes in our species, but what's enabled the development of our social and cultural worlds and lifestyles are instead a massive number of cultural changes. And those adaptations really started around 10,000 BP with the advent of farming during the Neolithic Era, or the Neolithic Revolution. So here's another kind of cool thing. Once the Neolithic Revolution occurred, we could never go back to the way things were before. So there are some like shorter videos in the slideshow that will show you that even though there are groups that choose to engage in hunter-gatherer lifestyles still to this day, they face pressures and problems that are a result of the way we changed the natural and social environment so dramatically starting 10,000 years ago. So thinking relativistically, while we tend to assume that the start of farming was an advance and it was progress and that it was a good thing, it's not good or bad. It just has consequences. And those are different for different people and at different times, right? And depending on what you value and how you see the world. So even though archaeologists construct theories about the past by studying the way people live in the present, specifically people who engage in ways of getting food and making a living that's very similar to the way people did in the past, and that's called ethnoarchaeology. No one and no group is stuck in the past or primitive or the same as they were before. Everybody's living in the present, but they choose to do so in a way that may be different from, another way for a whole bunch of reasons. And coming back to the Neolithic Revolution, although we know what happened, the other really cool thing about the beginning of farming is that how it happened is debated and different in different places and at different times, but yet it still it happened. So we have universal themes, traits, and theories, and then we have specific empirical data that's used to support those theories. Remember, theories aren't not facts, but instead a theory is an explanation of how facts are connected. So pay attention to the empirical data and the specific examples of how all these factors interact in different times and places as you read the material or you watch in the next couple weeks. And that's really all I have to say about the Neolithic Revolution and our transition to archaeology and culture. But here's what I want you to do now. I want you to make a timeline of the events and years that I mentioned. I want you to write down important and new words, and then I want you to look them up. Then I want you to use that timeline and those words to try and explain what I just said to somebody else. Or to yourself, because some of us are alone, or to your dog. Pandita, do you want to learn about the Neolithic Revolution? What about the Paleolithic Revolution? What about the Pleistocene? She doesn't care about any of those. Pandita, do you want to learn about how Homo neanderthalis interbred with Homo sapiens? She wants to learn about the sexy stuff and Neanderthals having sex with Homo sapiens. She's so dirty. All right. So, whatever. What I want you to do is use the timeline that you've created, use the important concepts to try and explain the big ideas either to yourself or to someone else. You have the specific data at your fingertips in the book. You can find it. It's on videos. But you need to understand the big themes and the big patterns so that you know when you need to look for the specific examples. Or at least, maybe I'm not good at memorization, so that's how I think about things. But this is how you study when you're trying to learn stuff, not just memorize what I told you, right? When you're trying to understand concepts and patterns, it's a different type of learning and teaching than it is when you are memorizing sort of decontextualized information. So if you try and do that and you have questions, that's awesome. That means you're thinking about the material, which is the whole point, right? Guys, you are smarter than already. But you're not smarter than Pandita. Pandita, how smart are you? Whatever. All right. So, like me, subscribe. No, you can't do that. They just say that on YouTube makeup tutorials. My mixtape drops. No, it doesn't. It's not an appropriate thing to say either. I don't know. I'm out. Come talk to me virtually or on the phone. You can book me. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye.